Okay, and we should be recording now. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Isabel Knight, and I am the middle grade fantasy author of the Enchantria series. And today I am super excited to be back here again with another author interview. And the author I will be interviewing today is Mike Steele, the author of a new middle grade historical fiction, Not Lucille.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, thank you so much for, doing this interview.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, to start us off, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, what your book is about, and also maybe share where you got the idea for Not Lucille?
Sure. My name is Mike Steele. I am an author and a playwright, and I just released my first middle grade novel. It's called Not Lucille. It's about a little girl named Lucy, set in 1931 in Trenton, New Jersey. And I got the idea for the story because I grew up right outside of the city of Trenton. And I always heard people talk about this park in the city, and they refer to it as the Deefies. And I always thought that Deefies was a very strange word for a park. And so I started digging around and trying to figure out where the name came from for this park. And what I learned was that back in the early 1900s, the site of the park used to be a campus for school for the deaf. And I don't really know if the nickname Deefies actually came from the word deaf, if it was some sort of nickname or pejorative or anything. So I kind of had to take some creative liberties in the story. And the students in the story, the kids in the story, refer to the school for the deaf as the Deefies. Um, and as I was thinking, like, oh, there used to be a school here, deaf students, right in the middle of the city of Trenton, and it happened to be in an Italian American neighborhood at the time that the school was there. And I thought, I wonder how the students at the school interact with the people of the neighborhood. And that kind of got my mind going and thinking about what a story could be.
Yeah, that's actually really cool how you got the idea for Not Lucille. I actually was not expecting that. But, Not Lucille is, a historical fiction. And, at the back of the book, there's like, a little section where you talk a little bit about the topics in this book. And so, how much research did you have to do for this book, and how did you go about doing it?
I had to do a lot of research. It's set in 1931 and 1932. Of course, I was not alive to see those time periods. My grandparents were, and they had always told stories about their childhood. So I kind of had a sense of what things were like in a very general way. And then as I started to draft the story, I needed to find very specific information. For example, Lucy goes to school like most kids, and I had to figure out what school looked like in the 1930s. I obviously knew what the buildings looked like because a lot of those buildings are still standing in, at least in Trenton. And I had to figure out though what the day looked like, and that was actually one of the hardest things to find information about was what happened at school. And I think the reason is because I'm also a teacher. Schools tend to keep their curriculums somewhat secretive so that other schools can't steal, what they do. But I think that just as time has gone by and we've lost a lot of that word of mouth of what was going on in the time, it was very difficult to find what students were learning, what the day kind of looked like. I had to I'm a librarian, a school librarian, so I'm pretty good at research, but I really had to think outside of the box and use a lot of video um, reference materials, interviews with people who lived in the time period, and just kind of piece together what the school day might have looked like. And that's just one example of what I had to research. There was all kinds of things that I had to research about the time period. And it's funny because as the drafts went by, I would think to myself, wait a minute, I'd read a line or two, and I'd think, wait a minute, could this have actually happened at that time period? And it was probably there. Draft 27 is the one that went to print. And it was probably somewhere in the 20s that I was reading one of the lines that I wrote in the book where Lucy's father brings home a bottle of wine. And it struck me, I was like, wait a minute. I think alcohol was illegal in this time period. How did I not even think about that as I was writing it? And so, just as the drafts went by, I would constantly be Googling, looking at videos on YouTube, interviews, reading, trying to find pictures, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine, especially since, as someone who clearly is was not alive during that time period. And, I think that that is definitely like one of the hardest parts about writing historical fiction, possibly because, you do need to, of course, do so much research, especially with like the really little, like specific details that really bring this book to life. And so, what do you think were some of the hardest parts about doing this research?
It was definitely finding the little details like you mentioned. Um, a lot of times I needed to find something very, very specific, like going back to the school. I would need to think, what would fifth graders, Lucy's in fifth grade, what would fifth graders be writing about in that period? And it's you can't just Google that and get that information. You have to kind of find resources that are going to tell okay, let me find a resource that's going to tell me something about school in that period, and then let me hope that that information that I need is going to be there. And every now and then, I would end up going down this spiral of research and finding other information that I thought was interesting and could add into the story. But it really did take a lot of time.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually have, tried writing like it's sort of technically a fantasy, but it's it was very much inspired by like ancient China, and I actually was trying to juggle two projects at a time, and I think the research part was why I decided not to juggle two projects at a time because it's a fantasy book that's technically inspired a lot by ancient China. And so, I decided to set that aside for the time being because, I do feel like research and, just getting all of those little details right and doing all of that research is definitely, something that's going to take a lot of effort and honestly, some things that I definitely do not think I can do while juggling two projects at a time.
Yeah, you can come back to this one.
Yeah, like writing a single book in a made up world is already hard enough, and then adding another project that, needs a lot of research. Like, I'm the kind of person who crumbles under pressure,
Oh
so
no. All right, you can come
yeah,
back to this one.
yeah. And so, there is a character in Not Lucille, Miss Gillingham, and she's definitely one of my favorite characters in this book. And, as you start getting, deeper into the story, you really start seeing more of her and who she really is. And, not just a cranky teacher who dislikes Lucy. And so, how did her character come to you? And did you always know that she was going to turn out to be that way?
I did always know that she was going to turn out to be not the character that we expected. Uh, I remember being in middle school, and there was just this one teacher who was all the students thought was very, very mean, very strict. And when I was in high school, I bumped into her, and she said to me, "By the way, what did the students used to call me?" And I was like, what do you mean?" She's like, "Oh, every year the students come up with another name for me. What did they used to call me when you were in middle school?" And I thought to myself, interesting. Like, she knew that she was strict. She knew that the students, were scared of her. Many of them didn't like her. And as I was talking to her when I was just a couple years older, I realized that. she was a human, a person, and this was the teacher that we saw in the classroom was just her method of being a teacher. And she really was not, there was a purpose to that. You know, she wanted the students to learn, and that was how she got the students to learn. And so Miss Gillingham, you know, she's a very strict teacher, but she's also a human, and you get to see that as the story unfolds.
Yeah, I think that is honestly why she is one of my favorite characters in this book. And I actually love that like you kind of like took inspiration from, your real life teacher. I always really do like it when authors, just manage to, I guess, like have characters inspired by people in real life because I feel like that is always something that I would definitely struggle with a lot.
Really?
Yeah, like I don't know, it's kind of hard to say or, explain, but just like if I knew this person in real life, how the heck would I, have a character inspired by them in a book? And especially since, I write fantasy and no doubt the character is definitely going to go off on some epic quest and go on a few bizarre adventures, I suppose.
Interesting. Well, in my book, Lucy is inspired by my grandmother. She's 10 years old, and I didn't know my grandmother when she was 10 years old, but I just kind of had to imagine what my grandmother was like, and that's how the character evolved.
Yeah. And that what actually was my next question, and that was how did the character of Lucy come to you? And how did you really flesh out her personality and were there any struggles while writing her?
Hmm. So once I had that idea for the story of this deaf school in an Italian American neighborhood, I thought to myself, well, it'd be interesting if my grandmother somehow interacted with a student who was deaf, because my grandmother was a very, very talkative person. And so I thought to myself, well, if she talks so much, but she meets somebody who can't talk at all, what would happen? And that was kind of the lightning bolt that started the whole story. And so Lucy, I modeled after my grandmother. My grandmother was short. She had red hair like Lucy. She was left-handed like Lucy. Um, and it really was not hard to craft Lucy once I knew I was modeling her after what I imagined my grandmother to be like at 10 years old. And of course, Lucy, the character, is not my grandmother. A lot of the things that happened to her, did not happen to my grandmother, but I had to kind of imagine how she would respond to certain situations. And so it was very easy to write Lucy for me.
Yeah, and I think you really did an amazing job with Lucy's character because I really do feel like she is one of those characters that, she has such a vivid personality, and I feel like she just really comes off the page.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and there's another part of this book which I really do love, and in this book, Lucy is left handed, and it actually does kind of play a part in the story. And you also mentioned that it was, one of the first elements of the story of, the plot before there was even a plot. And so, can you tell us a little more about that and how, the left handed storyline came to you and how it became, such, I guess, like an important part of the book?
Yeah, like I said, my grandmother was left-handed, and as she got older, she still wrote with her right hand because that's what she was forced to do in school. But everything else she did with her left hand, cooking, cleaning, and whatever she was doing with her left hand except writing. So she would always talk about when she was in school, the teachers would make her write with her right hand, and she finally, learned how to do it, and that felt natural to her by the time she was an adult. Um, and I didn't necessarily anticipate that being a part of the story when I first decided I was going to write this. But the one thing when you're writing a story is you've got to give your character a problem or an obstacle to overcome. And so as I was just kind of thinking back and forth on what the plot was going to be. I thought, well, Lucy could be left-handed, and if she could really have a challenge learning how to write with her right hand. And I was like, that would be a very boring book of this little girl learning to write with her right hand. I don't think anybody's going to want to read that book. So it kind of, it always stuck with me though as I was writing, and I knew it had to be a part of the story, but I knew it couldn't be like the central plot. And as other ideas came to me, the left-handed thing kind of took a smaller and smaller portion of the story, but by the end, it really comes to be an important part of Lucy's identity.
Yeah, I really do think so, and I definitely cannot imagine this book without that storyline. And I actually did relate to Lucy because I too am left-handed. I use my left hand for practically everything except using the mouse with my laptop.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think my mom, when I was little, like, I don't remember it, but my parents told me that, like, they would, like, sometimes try to get me to write with my right hand, and I think they said that I would do so while they were looking, and the second they looked away, I would switch back to using my left hand.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm right-handed, and anything I try to do with my left hand is impossible. So I cannot imagine being forced to use my left hand all the time.
Yeah, like I have tried writing with my right hand, and I mean I probably could if I did practice, like Lucy did, and it would also make, notebooks with these huge spiral bound notebooks was it would make it easier to write in cuz it's kind of uncomfortable to write in these huge spiral bound notebooks for me, but I have tried writing with my right hand and um, it didn't go well.
Yeah, just stick with the left hand.
Yeah. And, there is also a deaf character in this book, and she is one of my favorite characters. And I think by now, I have a lot of favorite characters in your book, but there is a deaf character in this book, Florence. And, I think you probably already answered, the first part of this question, but why did you decide to include a deaf character in this book, and how did you really approach writing a deaf character?
Florence was a challenge because she was inspired by nobody. She was a character that I did not have like a model for when I started writing her. But what I did know was that I wanted her to be the opposite of Lucy in certain ways. And obviously the hearing and the speaking was a given. But I also made her tall and Lucy is short. I made her blonde and Lucy has red hair. So once I kind of had Florence's physical features defined and I knew what she was going to look like, it did become easier to start writing her personality as well. Lucy is very excited and excitable and hyper, and Florence is much calmer and grounded. And but the one thing that I wanted to make sure that I got right was writing a deaf character who was realistic. And being not deaf, I had to do a lot of research. I do know people who are deaf, and that helped because I kind of I know some of the things that they've talked about with their struggles, and also the things that they wish people knew about deafness. But I did also work with two deaf sensitivity editors who both read drafts of the script that were like somewhere in the middle, probably drafts, 14, 15, 16. And they really just helped to fix some inaccuracies or to tell me, oh, um, like one of the big things was in the story is that Florence can read lips. And so I had for much of the story I had Lucy talking to Florence, and Florence was able to understand what Lucy was saying. And the deaf sensitivity editors actually were both of them agreed reading lips works, but it is maybe 50% accurate. So there's a lot of, like, Lucy wouldn't say something one time and Florence would totally understand what she was saying. Lucy might have to repeat herself or, use at least some American Sign Language. So working with those deaf sensitivity editors really, really helped to make sure that Florence was an accurate depiction of a deaf character.
Yeah. And I think it's actually really great that, you do know deaf people in real life and you also had, two deaf, sensitivity editors. And I definitely do agree that that helps a lot. Especially, I do have plans to write like a fantasy book where the main character is deaf, and I have not started writing that book yet because I wouldn't possibly know how, and I do think I'd be rather terrified too.
Yeah, it's difficult to try to get into the mind of somebody whose experience you really don't understand, but I'm sure that you could, find ways to make sure that your character's accurate.
Yeah, and I really do think that Florence's character really did feel, really real and, true to her. And, I don't know any, like, actual deaf people. And so, but I still really do think that, Florence still is a very realistic character.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so this is like I think the seventh question, and it's kind of a sneaky question that I ask almost all writers I meet. And this is probably going to be a really quick question, but do you have a secret pen name that nobody knows anything about?
I don't. I actually thought about it with this story because Lucy is a girl, and I thought to myself, girls might want to read books about girls written by women or girls, and that's not me. So it's like maybe I should use a fake name, a pen name. And then I was like, no, I want credit for this story. So no, I write under my own name.
Yeah, like I've asked another author this question, and she said the same thing. She has worked too hard on her books to not have her real name on the covers.
Yes, yes, this is me.
Yeah.
This is my name.
Yes, definitely. And I don't know about most readers, but I feel like for me, I don't really care much about the author's name or identity or gender. I just look at the cover, look at the blurb. If it looks good, I will snatch up the book
Well, it's
immediately.
good to know.
Yeah, and probably the only times I will glance at the author's name is like if I'm reading like the about the author or if I'm asking them to an interview.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right, and this is the final question, which again I ask every writer I meet, and that is what is your advice for young writers or, writers of any age who really want to start writing and get their books out there?
Just start writing. You're not going to know if you can do it. You're not going to know what you need to work on until you start. And you don't have to make a big deal out of it. Just when you have the time, sit down, start writing whatever it is that you were thinking about writing. You just start, and you might stop, and you might come back to it in a couple days, or you might come back to it in a couple years. I think I started Not Lucille and wrote the first maybe couple of pages, and then life happened. Life got in the way, and I didn't even touch it again for another couple of years. I think it maybe was a year and a half, 2 years. And then the COVID lockdown happened, and I found myself with a lot of time. And I was able to finish it the first draft within a couple of weeks. So just sit down, start. And once you see where the challenges are, then you know what you have to work on. You know what you have to figure out how to do. There's a lot of great resources online. If you're saying, oh, I'm really stuck with how to flesh out these characters and make them feel real, You can Google some tips. If you're thinking to yourself, oh, I really have no idea how to create a plot that's engaging, you can stop. You can go read books that you find engaging and think, what did the author do here? Why am I so interested? And you can apply it to your own writing. But if you never actually start, you'll never know.
Yeah, I really agree with you. And I think that is some fantastic advice. And, it's really interesting that, you started Not Lucille and, wrote the first few pages and then put down the book. I think, like, one of the things that I have heard from another writer is that if there is, like, a story that is really meant to be written, and if writing is really meant for someone's, and even if life gets in the way for even years, that story will always come knocking back at your door.
Yeah, yeah. I always say that I'm an expert at writing the first couple of pages, and then I don't know where to go from there. So I have the first couple of pages of many, many stories written, and I'm sure I'll pick up some of them again.
Yeah, oh my gosh, same actually. I have a whole folder of that's it's literally just labeled incompleted beginnings of novels, and in there I just have a lot of ideas that I just wrote out like the first few pages and then dropped it.
Yeah,
And I feel like I often do just bounce around with books. Like when I land on an idea, I do stick with it, of course, but before I land on an idea, it's really just me bouncing around with a million different ideas, figuring out what works, writing quite a few pages of what, a million ideas, and then dropping them.
yeah. But you know what? I'm sure that's the way it is in many, many creative fields. I mean, figure that
Yeah,
first a chef, has to bake or cook how many dishes before they find the ones that are actually, worthy of going on the menu. So it's the same thing with
yeah,
writing.
yeah, definitely. So, those are actually all of the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for doing this interview. It was amazing getting to, ask you these questions and learn a bit more about how you wrote Not Lucille. And, I wish you the very best of luck with all of your future projects.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and good luck with your folder of ideas as well.
Yeah. And, thank you guys for watching this interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you took something away from this interview. And I also hope that you will go and check out Mike's book, Not Lucille. It is a fantastic middle grade historical fiction. I will probably be telling all of my friends to read the book. And, possibly also threatening them to read it. And, I will say, I don't actually threaten them. None of the threats are actually, I don't seriously threaten them because nobody should do that. But, just threaten them jokingly to read the book. I've done that loads of times.
All right. Well, I hope they read it.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this interview. And thank you, Mike, for doing this interview. And yeah, I suppose I shall see you guys in a future video. All right. Thanks for coming. Bye.